Yes, Miss Graham.
Constable Walker, before lunch I'd asked you about paragraph 26 of your statement, and we were talking about the different factors that you'd been thinking about, and I had a number of factors that I wanted to speak to you about before we move on to the scene, and I'll return to that now if I may.
Yep.
So we were talking about things that we might hear other evidence about, and I wonder if you can help me understand if you took account of them. And can we look first of all at PS 17208, and this is a PowerPoint, a series of slides, a demonstration that apparently is part of the Police Scotland Officer or was part of the Police Scotland Officer Safety Training at the time. And I'd like to look at slide number 11, please. And this is, you'll see, called warning signs. It appears on the screen. And warning signs are attack gestures known as ritualised combat. And there's a number given there. Direct eye contact, subject stands tall to maximise height, head back, kicking the ground, large movements, breathing rate accelerates, and stop-start behaviour. Now, I think we can understand what direct eye contact is. What subject stands tall to maximise height? Do you understand what that is?
Yeah, so basically straight back, shoulders back, just to try and make yourself appear as big as possible. I mean, that'd be height and sort of width as well. Just, let's say, as tall as you could possibly be, just to give an imposing stance.
And head back?
Again, that's part of that. You put your head back, gives you a lot more height.
Right. And are these gestures that someone can adopt if you're attending an incident?
Yeah, that's normally something you would watch for once you'd actually engaged with somebody to judge how they were going to be with you.
So a warning sign for an attack?
Yeah, just the fact, like I was saying, that's when somebody comes across as that he didn't appear to be overly angry. Mm-hmm. When we're observing them, that's the sort of if somebody was up strong and ready for a fight. And
then kicking the ground?
I must admit, I've never actually seen that in action, so I'm not sure what that would look like, but pretty much as it would suggest.
Large movements, what are they?
Again, like I alluded to earlier, the hands in the air, the big gestures, who are you shouting at, what's this going on? Mm-hmm.
Breathing rate accelerates?
Again, you need to be close to somebody to judge that, but if you're getting ready for a fight, your body breathes quicker to get more oxygen in.
What's stop-start behaviour?
I would take that to be somebody who's calm with you one moment and erratic the next. So you really can't judge whether they're friend or foe. Just to be wary of them, because they could change in an instant. Mm.
But there were no signs of these types of behaviours or gestures when you arrived at Hayfield Road?
No, like I say, that would be more once you're actually speaking with someone, so you could get a better eye. I mean, obviously we're too far away to see if he's got direct eye contact or anything like that, but none of the, from a distance, the raised hands, it didn't appear to be angry at that point.
And then let's move on to the next slide, which is slide 12. So this is a danger signs slide. Danger signs are more significant than warning signs and are indicative of an imminent attack. So is this something that you had in your consciousness that you'd been trained on? Again,
that's part of the OST for when you're dealing with somebody, but if they were to immediately change, clench their fists, bring them up into a fighting stance, and you're standing 6 feet for them, you're going to end up in a physical altercation.
Lips tighten over teeth?
Yeah.
What's that?
It's probably when you speak through gritted teeth, probably. That's probably how I would take that. Yeah, somebody was.
And eyebrows drop to protect eyes?
Again, if you just sort of do the stereotypical look at somebody who wants to fight, they do that. Right. Sort of everything comes down for protection.
Your brow is moving down. Hands raised above waist?
To get ready to fight, to strike out.
Stance changes from square to sideway?
we would describe that as, in OST we use that as a defensive stance, but it protects the body. So if you're going to fight with somebody, you turn side on, or somebody was going to fight with us, you would turn side on, and it just protects the front of the body because you're side on to them.
So it minimises the area that person can.
Yeah, and again,
reach.
these are all sort of natural reactions. They all happen sort of subconsciously. That somebody who's going to fight will automatically go into that sort of.
If there's an
that
imminent
sort of stance
attack.
up, but yes.
Aggressor breaks their stare and looks for intended targets.
Sorry, I mean, to be honest, if I was dealing with a situation like that and somebody had all the sort of danger signs, unless they were fighting with a colleague, they would tend not to start looking for a target. They would be speaking to you and not happy with you, and you are the focus of their attention, you are their target. So I wouldn't really see what, that's the one that I've experienced, where they would suddenly be engaging with me and then change their mind and go and start fighting with somebody else.
And then if they're out of breath, the final signal will be lowering of their entire body before moving forward.
I don't know what the mechanics are behind that one, but
Something that you're aware of.
yeah, that'll be the final lunge towards you.
And then the last thing I want to ask you about in relation to this PowerPoint is in relation to acute behavioural disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So can we turn to slides 23 to 27? All right, we'll start with, is that 27? We'll start with positional asphyxia then. That's 23, is that? I can't see the number on the screen. Let's start with positional asphyxia. So there's slides about this. It's likely to occur when a subject is in a position that interferes with inhalation and or exhalation and cannot escape that position. Now this is something that you'd had training on.
Yes.
And something you were aware of
Yes.
before you went to Hayfield Road. And it says death can occur rapidly and restraints can increase the risk. So you were aware of all of that?
Yes.
And then can we move on to the next slide, please? And then it talks about risk factors that contribute or may contribute to the condition. And the factors listed there are body position, which restricts or blocks airway. What does that mean to you?
Lying in the prone position,
Prone.
so their own body weight.
Mm-hmm. Alcohol or drug intoxication, that speaks for itself,
Yes.
I think. Inability to escape position, what does that mean?
For me, I would probably suggest that means if you put somebody in the cell area at the back of a vehicle, if they're face down on the floor and they can't get away from that position, they're not unable to move away, but just because the shape of it or the actual shape of the cell, that they're just unable to move from the position that they've been put in.
And then subject is prone, so on their front, or pinned against the surface or slumped forward.
Yes.
So could be any of those.
Yes.
Obesity speaks for itself. Restraint, is that the restraint by officers in a
Yes.
particular position? Stress, what is, it says it's a risk factor. To what extent is stress a risk factor?
I would take that to mean that it probably falls onto the other one, the respiratory muscle fatigue, the fact that they're stressed, they're breathing harder and heavier. The oxygen demand on the body is higher.
Okay.
So if the breath can't keep up with the requirements of the body.
And then respiratory muscle fatigue.
Having to breathe too hard.
And then can we move on to the next slide? So signs and symptoms, active to passive, loud to quiet. Is that what you were saying a moment ago about someone changing, their demeanour changing when they're talking to you? Or is that something else?
No, that would be something else. That's somebody who has been loud, shouting. For instance, if you had somebody in the cell of the vehicle who were objecting to being locked up and then they suddenly go quiet or start to get quiet, and that could be because they're not getting enough air into their body to continue shouting.
So that can be a sign of positional asphyxia.
That could be a sign of many things, but yes, it could be of positional asphyxia as well.
Gurgling, gasping sounds.
Probably exactly as it says. You hear somebody starting to gasp for air.
Cyanosis?
Blueness of the lips and extremities. But normally of the lips area, I think, is usually the first one to show signs of going blue. So lack of oxygen in the blood supply.
So any sign of that could be a sign of positional asphyxia.
Yes, amongst other things, but yes.
And what does it mean, verbals?
That would be, again, somebody shouting out the actual fact that they can't breathe, they're no comfy.
Okay.
Just basically being told that they're having difficulty.
Thank you. The next slide, please. And then we're on to a slide for excited delirium. And this is describes a person exhibits violent behaviour in a bizarre and manic way, constant purposeless, often violent activity, meaningless speech and hallucinations with paranoid delusions, abnormally strength and pain tolerance, CS may not work. So the violent behaviour speaks for itself. Do you understand what someone acting in a manic way is?
Frantic and constant. Just constant motion activity.
Mm-hmm. And then it says underneath that constant purposeless, often violent activity. What's that describing?
The example I could give of that for it would be in excited delirium is I think people are drawn to reflective surfaces, so they'll go about smashing windows for no apparent reason.
Right. The meaningless speech and hallucinations with paranoid delusions. What does that mean to you?
Again, I had a case fairly recently where somebody was shouting out that everybody was here to kill them, we were all aliens, and just, you know.
And then the next bullet point is that abnormal strength or abnormally strong and pain tolerance.
Certainly the pain tolerance, a lot of the open hand controls that we do as well relies on what they call pain compliance, so pressure points in the body, bending joints in certain directions, and if they don't work, then it could be a result of a lot of things, but they're normally related to drugs, which obviously leads on to excited delirium.
So if you're performing a technique, an empty hand technique on a person, and they're not responding, and often pain is used to control people in those techniques, so they're not responding to that, that can be a sign of excited delirium?
It could be a sign of a lot of things, but yes, one of them is excited delirium.
And then it says CS may not work.
Yes.
Is that CS spray?
Yes.
So it may not work on a person if they're suffering from excited delirium?
Yes.
That's
and again, that CS spray doesn't work on a lot of people. Some people have natural immunity to it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are trained to be able to fight through it, namely armed forces. Again, just drug intoxication and also onto excited delirium. So it could be, it's not exclusively to excited delirium.
Not exclusively, but one of the red flags.
Yes.
I think that's, I'll look through all of those. Can I just see the next slide, please? Oh no, sorry, this is the final one. Excited delirium causes drug and or alcohol intoxication. You've mentioned that already. Psychiatric illness, or a combination of the above. So those are potential causes of excited delirium. And then underneath that it says medical emergency. Expect a sudden collapse. Acute exhaustive mania can be fatal. What do you understand by that reference to medical emergency?
That as soon as it's identified as being ABD or possibly ABD or excited delirium as it was called at the time, that an ambulance should be contacted as soon as possible.
And do you think that's as soon as you diagnose it, or as soon as you think that might be a potential diagnosis?
As soon as you think that it could be ABD, certainly now it needs to be classed as a medical emergency, and the ambulance need to be contacted
And
as soon as you suspect it might maybe.
And in 2015?
It would be a medical emergency probably as soon as you. I mean, they're pretty much the same. As soon as you think it might be, and as soon as you diagnose it to be. It's probably one and the same, but yes, as soon as you think that is the case, then certainly we request an ambulance.
And that's you calling and requesting the ambulance
Yes.
when you think that might be the
case.
cause. Because this is expect a sudden collapse and it can be fatal. Yeah. Could you look, please, at could you look at a SOP briefly for me? PS 11014, the care and welfare of persons in police custody. It's an SOP. And I'll just quickly take you to a section at 5.1.3 on excited delirium. Keep going, sorry, it'll be further down the page. It might, there should be a section with a excited delirium as the first letters. Well, let's leave that. I obviously don't have the right number. This says, people who appear to have this condition should only be restrained in an emergency and they should be taken by ambulance to hospital immediately the diagnosis is considered. Would that be consistent with what you've told us?
Yes.
Did you, on the 3rd of May in Hayfield Road, did you consider seeking medical assistance for the man that you saw when you first arrived?
When we first arrived?
Yes.
No.
No. Did you consider the possibility of drugs or alcohol intoxication with excited delirium or psychiatric illness?
Not initially, because you need to contact him and speak to him and try and, I mean, that's not something you could diagnose from 100, 200 metres away.
How would you diagnose that? How would you go about doing that?
Extremely erratic behaviour would be the only thing that you could maybe call out early from a distance.
But that's not what you had here.
That's not what we had here.
So how would you go about assessing whether that is a factor?
You would need to try and engage with the male first of all. There's only so much you could do from within a van.
Absolutely. So your engagement would be communicating with the person?
Yes.
Observing what you see?
The reaction that you get from them, yes.
And their reaction to any communication?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any, of your experience, how long would you say that process takes to communicate and observe the person?
It's an ongoing thing. You get to them, you try and speak to them. Do they speak back to you? Do they make eye contact with you? Do they acknowledge your existence? There's many factors that you do throughout. Mm-hmm. It's not just a case of turn up, run through a tick box and then come to a decision. You've got to gauge it as you go.
So it would take time, and you would spend some time with them to make that assessment?
To see what sort of reaction, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, I'd like to go back to we were discussing before lunch the position of the van in Hayfield Road. And I think what I would like to do first of all is go to the footage, an enhanced video timeline, and play part of that from around 7:22. This might help refresh your memory on this.
Duty control room to the set.
So we can see that at the moment we're 7:21 coming up to 7:22. And if we watch this through first. Right, can we stop it there for a moment? Did you see just at the end there on the footage on the right-hand side of the screen, the Snapchat footage?
Yeah.
And did you see your van there?
Yes.
I wonder if we could go back to that and have that on the screen, please. And does that refresh your memory about where the van was that day?
Yes.
Just approach. I'll give you an update.
Keep going, please, till we see the van at the bus stop. Keep going, please. That's there. Right, thank you. So can we see on the right-hand side, the Snapchat footage, that we actually see the bus shelter there, and the van is parked to the left of the bus shelter.
Yes.
And can you see on the road there that there's you can see some of the yellow markings on the road
Yes.
opposite the bus shelter? And the van parked at an angle, as you said.
Yep.
But it's not in front of the bus shelter or at that section.
Yeah, correct, aye.
Yeah. And do you see in the reconstruction tile that the bus shelter, we can see the roof of the bus shelter with the bus stop markings on the road,
Yes.
and that the van is positioned at an angle but not right up against the lettering of the bus stop that is on the road. Do you see that?
Yes.
So are you content looking at that picture of the Snapchat footage and the reconstruction tile that the position of the van was slightly further away from the bus stop at a slight angle?
I would have to say the reconstruction tile is slightly different from the Snapchat footage.
So you think that's slightly different?
Yes, the rear offside tyre sitting on the dotted yellow line, and the reconstruction tile at the top is not.
Right. So you think did you say the near side is on the dotted line?
The
or
near-
did you
the near
see
side.
the offside?
The near side rear tyre.
Right. So the near side rear tyre you think is on the dotted line, and the rear side tyre on the reconstruction image you don't think is close enough to the dotted line?
Now, according to the reconstruction, it's the front wheel near side that's on the yellow dotted line.
But you think it's actually the rear?
That's you can see for the Snapchat footage that's the rear tyre that's on the. So the position of the vehicle is different from the reconstruction tile.
Okay. Are you content with the reconstruction insofar as it is positioned within the bus stop area, not at the far end of the bus stop area, which I think is what you'd indicated with the red circle?
Yes, on the initial drawing, I thought I was closer to the pavement. On the pavement on the left-hand side. Sorry, the right-hand side.
Yeah, the pavement on the right-hand side, towards the right-hand side of the bus stop.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then I'd like to look at some stills, if I may. So these are stills from the 3D reconstruction. And we'll look at number 2 first of all, I think. And you'll see that the bus stop is created there with the yellow markings on the road, on Hayfield Road. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then the white transit van is positioned there. You think it's slightly closer to the pavement
Yes.
than the reconstruction. And then can we look at still...
Or the markings on the reconstruction are different. The van position might be right, but the yellow lines are different. So, but there's an inconsistency there.
You feel there's an inconsistency there. And then we can look at slide 5, please. And again, you'll see the white transit van on the right-hand side. And so the rear tyre on the near side is closer to the yellow lines, but it's the rear far side tyre that you think should be closer to the yellow lines.
No, the rear near side tyre is not on the yellow lines, where in the Snapchat footage it is on the yellow lines. So it's a couple of feet. It needs to be a couple of feet that way.
It needs to be closer to the yellow line, on
Yes.
the yellow line.
If you're comparing the two photos, I would say yes.
So would you be comfortable if that near side rear tyre on the van was on the yellow dashed lines, the broken line, you'd be more comfortable with the position of your van?
Or the yellow lines need to be further out underneath the van. It depends what's
Okay.
wrong.
Okay, right. Well, we'll address that. Thank you. Now, could we go back to still 2, please? And before lunch, you were talking about when you arrived, you were driving.
Yes.
And could you point on the screen to where you first saw the man when you arrived and parked the van, sorry?
When we arrived, like I say, when we drove sort of straight towards his direction. So just going through line of sight through the windscreen, he must have been close to there.
Right. And what distance did you think that was?
The distance I gave was the distance when Alan Payton got out the van and engaged with the male, which was, as I say, I could see through the van. So by that point, he's obviously walked round a bit further. And I said it was about 40 feet at that point.
I wonder if you could use a facility that we have on the screen that allows you to draw a line.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've given us the red circle with the number 1. Can you indicate with your finger, by dragging along the screen, what direction the man was walking in? Thank you. So he was on the pavement.
Yes.
And that would be facing you in the van.
Yes.
And when you got out of the van, what position was he in on the road, on the pavement, sorry?
Probably close to where the arrowhead is at the moment.
All right. Thank you. And he was still facing in the direction of the roundabout?
Yes, he was still walking in that general direction.
Now, I'd like to hold that thought in our minds, but I'd like to play you the footage again now. So this is from the enhanced video timeline. And I'd like to play from 7:20 and 23, when your van stopped at the bus stop, to 7:20 and 39, which is a period of around 16 seconds. So we'll start at 7:20 and 23. You'll see your van just coming onto the screen at the moment. So I'm going to ask you, first of all, first playthrough, I'm going to ask you to look at the CCTV. Second playthrough, I'm going to ask you to look at the reconstruction tile. And then the third time, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay.
So let's play, first of all, from 7:20, 23, and just watch the CCTV, please.
You need to make an initial assessment yourself and feed back to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel. Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. It's described.
Thank you. And then we'll go back to 7:20 and 23, and then we will, the second time through, we'll look at the reconstruction tile.
You need to make an initial assessment yourself and feed back to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel. Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it.
Thank you. And then we can go back to 7:20 and 23.
Perspective. If you get sightings of them.
And what I'm going to do is ask Miss Wildgoose to play it for a second or two, and then we'll pause it, and I'll ask you to do that. Thank you.
Male, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and
Pause
feed
it,
back.
please. Right, we see here that on the reconstruction tile, one blue dot has appeared beside the white van. And we've heard evidence that when some movement is visible on the CCTV, that ALI have put a blue dot to signify that someone is there. So that's on the near side of the van.
Yes.
And you've already told us that PC Peyton got out first.
Yes.
So that blue dot, is that likely to be PC Peyton?
Yes.
Right. And then can we play another second or two, please, Miss Wildgoose?
Straight away,
Right,
when I
pause,
listen out
please.
on.
And that second blue dot has now appeared. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that appeared to come from the driver's side of that van.
Yes.
So is that likely to be you?
Yes.
Thank you. And you've talked in your statement about walking to the front of the van. So does that blue dot appear to be consistent with the movement that you took when you got out of the van?
Yes.
Thank you. And then we'll play it just a moment or two further. Well, I say a
The
moment,
channel.
sorry, can you stop that? Sorry, I wasn't quick enough to stop there. Is it possible to rewind? At one point we see 3 dots.
Out on the channel.
So, right, so as the second blue dot that you said was you disappears, there now appear to be 2 blue dots on the near side of the van.
Yes.
Who would they be?
The PC Peyton and Mr. Bow.
So the blue dot that's closest to the van, who would that be?
I don't agree with the positioning from them on that, but that would be Mr. Bow.
So you think closest to the van is Mr. Bio
Yes.
and further away is PC Peyton?
Yeah. Yes.
You don't think PC Peyton would be closer to the van?
No, I think Mr. Bow would be on the pavement with PC Peyton in front of him. I don't know where they've got the distance from the camera to position that blue dot.
Well, let's just go back to this. So there's 2 blue dots there. One blue dot is closer to the passenger side of the van, and one blue dot is closer to the pavement side.
Yes.
The blue dot that is closer to the passenger side, who do you think that is?
Closer to the passenger side would be Mr. Bow.
You think?
Yes.
So at some point you think PC Peyton and the man changed positions?
No. PC Peyton's got out the van in front of the gentleman, so PC Peyton would be on the Mr. Bow's, or looking at it. He would be on the left, Mr. Bow would be on the right, and I'm at the front of the van.
Right. So at this moment in time, you're at the front of the van.
Yes.
You can't be seen, so there's no blue dot.
So there's no blue dot.
And Mr. Bio has been walking along the pavement at
Yes.
the bus stop, which you showed us in the previous slide.
Mhm.
And he has now, according to this reconstruction, walked onto the bus stop area. Is that your understanding?
No, I don't think the two of them were ever that close together at that point.
Okay.
I don't know how they've derived from the CCTV footage the distance from the camera, but if that blue dot was, if you take a line from the camera through that blue dot and put it back onto the pavement, and then that might be a better and more realistic spacing.
Right. So at the point you're at the front of the van in Hayfield Road,
Yes.
can you see PC Peyton and Shekubai?
Yes.
And when you were at the front of the van, describe to me where PC Peyton was.
Directly in front of...
On front of what?
Directly in front of Shekubai.
And who was closest to the van?
They were both on the pavement.
They were both on the pavement.
Yes.
And so PC Peyton was closer to the van, did you say? No, I'm obviously getting myself confused. Okay, just describe for me when you were at the front of the van where the two men were standing.
So I was at the front of the van. On the pavement, directly in front of me, would be Mr. Bow, and then further along the pavement in front of him was Mr. Payton,
Right.
or Constable Payton.
Okay. I see. So the man is closer to the van and PC Payton was he facing you at that stage then? Could you see the front of PC Payton or
Yes,
the back?
the front.
So he was facing in towards you,
He was facing towards Mr. Bayou.
towards Mr. Bayou.
Yes,
And which direction was Mr. Bayou facing?
towards Mr. Payton.
So they were facing each other.
Yes,
And when you were standing at the front of the van, you could see the man slightly to the left and PC Payton slightly to the right, or were they completely in line with each other?
no, I could see them clearly, both left and right.
So the man, Sheku Bayou, to the left and...
No.
him to the right and PC Payton to the left.
Are you able to bring up the reconstruction tile bigger, and I'll be able to...
Yes, that would be good. Let's look at the still, please, that we just looked at. Right, so this is, let me see. Could we go to the previous still, please? So this is still 5. You'll see on the right-hand side, your van is there.
Mhm.
And we can see the yellow markings from the bus stop, and we can see part of the pavement. So could you point out, please, where Mr. Bayou was? And can you point out where PC Payton was? And it may be that it's not possible on this still for you to show us where you were, but if we went on to the 6th one, or the 2nd one, maybe. Let's go back to the 2nd one. And could you point out where you were?
Yeah, so I would be coming round from the front, from the driver's side to the front, so I would be about there, at the front of the vehicle.
And again on this screen, can you show us where Mr. Bayou was?
It's a slightly different angle, but roughly there on the pavement.
And he'd walked there from the previous, and the previous still you put him nearly to the bus stop.
Yes, that's
the shelter,
the
and
time
he'd
we've
walked
arrived
to that position.
and got out of the vehicle. He's walked down to that point. Yes.
And can you point where PC Payton is, if possible? So PC Payton is further along Hayfield Road towards the roundabout, and he's facing Mr. Bayou,
Yes.
blocking his path.
Yes.
And Mr. Bayou is continuing along Hayfield Road towards the roundabout, but now he has PC Payton in front of him.
Yes.
And they're facing each other,
Yes.
and you are beside red circle 1,
Yes.
looking at the scene from that position.
Yes.
Thank you, sorry, I got myself a bit tied up in knots there. Right, when you gave us your inquiry statement, and I won't move away from this still at the moment, you said paragraph 28, you can look at it if you wish. Payton got out the van first, and you got out a few seconds later, and you say at paragraph 28, Payton verbally engaged with Sheku Bayou. Can you explain what you mean when you say he verbally engaged?
Basically got out in front of him, asked him to stay where he was, let him see your hands, etc. But like I said, at that point there was a lack of non-verbal communication from him. We still continued to walk, and no really engaging with the fact that we were there.
Was he effectively ignoring you?
Yes.
And you say in paragraph 31 that PC Payton shouts a command at Shekubayo as you get out of the van.
Yes.
And he said, "Stay where you are, don't move." Is that's your recollection?
Words to that effect,
Or
yes.
words to that effect. And when he shouted that command, was he effectively in the position you've circled at number 3?
Yes, they were both sort of dynamically moving along the pavement towards Henry Road, but yeah, they were sort of, yeah, that was the positions relative to each other.
Is that the first thing that he says to Shekubayo?
That's the first thing I'm aware of.
That's the first thing you heard?
Yeah.
Were you aware of him attempting to communicate with Shekubayo in any other way? Verbally?
Verbally, no, just the clear commands to stay where he was. And
did he warn him, or did he ask him if he had any sharp instruments on him?
I can't recall. I think it was let's see your hands or something like that, rather than a straightforward question. But
so he did say something before. Was that before the command, or was it after the command?
At the moment, I don't recall.
So paragraph 28, you say he's got out the van. He said, "Stay where you are, don't move."
Mm-hmm.
There's no mention there of any other comments. I'm just wondering, was it before he said that, "Stay where you are, don't move," or after?
I don't recall. I could just be aware I'm engaging with the meal, but I don't recall.
Right. Did he ask him if he had any sharp implements and ask him to remove them from a pocket?
Not that I heard, no.
Did he warn him at that stage or provide a warning that he might use his spray?
He was standing in the defensive pose with the spray drawn, but I can't recall if he actually made a statement at that point.
PC Payton has gave a statement to Perk on the 4th of June, and he seems to be saying that he shouted, "Get down on the fucking ground." There doesn't seem to be any other suggestion that he engaged in him with any other conversation.
Right.
Do you disagree with what PC Payton's recollection was?
I have no reason to know.
No. Could you be mistaken that he had any other verbal engagement with him?
Yes, but I mean, a lot of what you say in that sort of situation is generic. That's what you get taught in OST, get back, stay where you are, show us your hands. It rolls off the tongue. It's drilled into you. So, you didn't really pay attention. You're expecting that you know what he's going to be saying, so you're not really paying attention to what he's saying.
So, is it common for police officers to use swear words when they're issuing commands?
It's not uncommon if somebody's not listening to you to try and stress the point. Do I swear at people? Yes. It's the local lingo, I suppose.
Is it common for it to be the first thing that someone says, where the first conversation is using bad language?
Again, that would need to depend on, like I say, I've maybe missed part of what was saying, or whether that was his first or what he said. I don't know. That would be his perception at the time.
Certainly, I'm simply reading out what PC Payton's Perk statement says.
Mm-hmm.
We've not heard from PC Payton so far, but his recollection on the 4th of June in 2015 was that he shouted, "Get down on the fucking ground." Do you think that would come across as quite aggressive?
Depends on what manner he said it, but...
Right. Well, you were there. How did he say that?
as a verbal, a shouted verbal command, so that it would be heard.
All right, let's leave that there. And then you've told us in paragraph 33 in your statement that PC Peyton sprayed him with his CS spray.
Mhm.
When he sprayed him, we're looking at this image on the screen now. Was he still in that position in Hayfield Road?
No, Mr. Bayou never stopped walking towards PC Peyton. PC Peyton was back stepping whilst engaging with the male.
Right.
So he held a constant distance from him, but the male was always constantly walking towards him, which is probably why the urgency, it probably explains the urgency and the fact that he swore when he's tried to make the male stop where he is. It wasn't a case of we got out, stood in front of him and he stopped to talk to us. He just continued walking down the street. And as I say, PC Peyton's tried to engage with him, and Mr. Bowes constantly closed down the gap towards him, so he's had to try and work to keep that reaction gap. So yeah, that was although I've got marked as 2 and 3, that was dynamically walking down the pavement at that distance from each other. Sorry, from each other.
That's fine. I think there's water there
I've got some,
if you'd like a glass. So number 2, Mr. Bio, he's continuing to walk along. Was he walking along the pavement towards the roundabout at Henry Road?
I believe so, yes.
And can you then, maybe we'll look at another still, maybe look at the next one. Well, actually, number 6, please, I think I would prefer. Right, so you'll see that this is from a slightly different angle. Can we bring that down slightly so I can see the page? You'll see the transit van there and the bus stop markings. And then you'll see the pavement you were describing that Mr. Bio was walking along.
Mm-hmm.
Can you indicate on this image where Mr. Bio was when PC Peyton sprayed him? And where was PC Peyton?
Again, he'd moved back and back and back, trying to keep the reaction gap, but he's probably about that point.
So that he's in the area where we can see a path actually leading through the trees in that sort of area. And the pavement then curves out slightly past the trees and goes towards the roundabout at Henry Road.
Yes.
Where were you at this point?
I could mind actually coming round to the front of the vehicle, being next to the headlamp.
How far were you from, well, we see the red circle there, number 1, which indicates where Mr. Bio was. How far were you from Mr. Bio?
20 feet.
You could see his back. Was he still facing PC Peyton?
Yes, he was still making his way towards PC Peyton.
Tell us how PC Peyton used his spray. Describe that for me.
Like I say, when he did engage with him, he had it in the spray, what we call the spray drawn position, which is with the spray up on with a defensive hand out, telling him to keep back, moving back from him, and then when he sprayed it, he just has normal thumb on the top of the canister, and that deploys the spray at that point.
And how far was PC Peyton from Mr. Bio at that time?
10 feet, certainly close enough for the spray to be deployed.
So that's within the sort of range of the CS spray?
Yeah, it's effective. They say it's effective up to about 15 feet.
I wonder if you would mind helping the chair by coming out from the chair and demonstrating that stance that you've been talking about. We'll be able to provide you with a model CS spray. So this would be to describe how PC Peyton stood. And when you come out, if you don't mind, you'll see that there's a small bit of plastic sticky tape on the ground. And just for your own information, Constable, that camera over there behind, that's the camera that's going to record what you demonstrate. That is the CS spray model that you have in your hand. And it's got water in it. So whatever you do, don't spray that at me. So that's the camera that we're going to have. And I'd just like you to demonstrate to the chair and the assessors how PC Peyton was standing. Right. So Mr. Bio would have been further away from PC Peyton, about, what was the distance you said, sorry?
Also here to the desk.
Here to the desk.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then this is coming forward, constantly taking steps back away from us.
Right. And so is he standing like that when he shouted, get down on the ground?
Yes.
Yes. But there was no reaction from Mr. Bio?
None whatsoever.
All right, please, thank you so much. Sit down again. Has Mr. Bio actually said anything by this point?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And you said in your statement, paragraph 33, that he continued to be a threat to PC Peyton.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying by I'm constantly walking towards him. Bearing in mind that we were still under the impression that he could have a knife concealed within him, or concealed on him.
So the big factor for you is he could have a knife concealed?
It's trying to keep that reaction gap, which this gentleman's constantly trying to close down by walking towards him.
PC Peyton's at the front.
Yes.
And you're towards the rear of Mr. Bio. So
Yes,
you're at position 3.
Yes.
So you can see the back of Mr. Bio and couldn't see any knife?
No, at that point, no.
If you had seen a knife, is that the sort of thing that you would have transmitted to PC Peyton by shouting?
Yeah.
So that'd be using the cut sort of approach? CUT, T being transmit to those around you? Is that the type of
Yes.
process that you would have followed?
Yeah.
But you couldn't see any knife there?
No, nothing apart.
Not on you?
No. That doesn't mean to say it's not under his clothing or whatever though. But yeah, there was nothing visible.
Nothing visible at that stage. We've heard he's in a white T-shirt.
Yeah.
And then if PC Peyton had seen anything from the front, would you have expected him to transmit that information to you?
If the male was to suddenly produce a knife, yes, it'd be like a...
So if he could see a knife,
if a knife
or
was to
the
be
male
brandished.
produced one, you would expect him to shout that to you?
Yes.
And is that in accordance with the CUT cut sort of approach that's taken?
Yeah, just generally looking out for your colleagues as well, but yeah.
So when the spray is used, at that point, you've heard nothing from Mr. Bio. He's not acting aggressively. There's no sign of a knife. He's not attacking PC Peyton. He's walking in that direction. Effectively, he's just simply ignoring the commands from PC Peyton. Is that right?
He's not choosing to follow instructions, yeah.
So he's not complying
Yes, he's
with
non-compliant.
PC Peyton's command?
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for, not compliant.
So he's just ignoring it completely?
Yeah.
Is that the normal sort of response you get from someone when 2 police officers attend in a van, one of them shouts a command, swearing perhaps, and has a spray? Did that strike you as odd? Or do you often get people ignoring you?
Anything's a possibility, so you just ignore you, try and walk past you, keep going, doesn't stop, try and make good his escape. He's just trying maybe look to get round PC Peyton to get to the path to run off. Anything's a possibility of that.
What difference did Mr. Bio's lack of verbal communication and lack of reaction, how did that impact into your assessment of the risk and the threat?
At that point, it didn't. I would have to say it was just all about the fact that he may still be in possession of a knife. That's the overriding safety to the preservation of life, first of all, is to get him under control and find any weapons.
Thinking about what PC Peyton did at the scene, he's shouted a command, has been ignored, he's used his spray.
Yes.
What could he have done to try and de-escalate that situation?
Bearing in mind the officer's safety part of it and the fact that that male was needing to come into custody, that he was possibly still in possession of a knife, that the roadway was still open for members of the public to arrive there, he's given a clear and verbal instruction for the male to stop and to comply, and the male's failed to do so. I think he's done what would be expected of him.
So he's used the spray. How did Mr. Bio react to the use of that spray?
He had no reaction to it, but I'm not convinced how much of it actually reached him, due to the wind that day was blowing, well, straight up from this image, but east to west.
Towards PC Peyton?
Towards PC Peyton, yes.
So he discharged his spray with the wind blowing towards him?
Yes.
Is it possible then that the spray didn't actually reach Mr. Bio?
And that didn't have an effect, yes, that's possible.
Well, it actually didn't even connect with him if the wind was blowing in the direction of PC Peyton.
Yes, because like I explained earlier, the CS spray atomises into a cloud, so that gets picked up in the wind and blown away, which is another reason that we moved on to PAVA.
Okay. From where you were, do you think the spray connected, the droplets connected with Mr. Bio?
That's impossible to say, because it goes into a cloud. You couldn't tell.
Okay. So, paragraph 34 of your statement, you say PC Peyton ducked away and crouched down towards the van with his hands to his face. So, can you see the area on this slide? If not, we've got others, but can you see the area where PC Peyton then ducked away and crouched down towards the van?
That would be at point number 2, where he sprayed and then it's blew back on him.
So he ducked down he didn't move from that position?
At that, he's folded over, ducked down and turned towards the van as opposed to...
He didn't move towards the van, he ducked down in the position he was in, on Hayfield Road?
Yes.
So he's crouched down in that area where the red circle is, and hands to his face.
Yes.
What did Mr. Bio do?
Continued walking towards him.
And when you say towards him, you mean towards where he was crouched down?
Yes.
Or
yes.
Oh, thank you. Again, any verbal communication at that point?
None that I'm aware of.
None. Did he demonstrate any reaction to having been sprayed?
None.
Had he changed direction? You've told us how he's walking along Hayfield Road. Had he actually changed direction in any way?
He didn't appear to have.
I'd like to go back to yourself now. You're the red circle number 3, and in your statement at paragraphs 37 and 44, you told us that you shouted a command.
Yes.
Stay there, drop your weapon. Was that in the direction of Mr. Bio?
Yes. I actually think I might have shouted "Oi" or something like that first to get his attention.
Did you get his attention?
Yes, he immediately turned round and started walking towards myself.
Right. Did you ask him if he had any... Did you attempt to communicate with him, ask him whether he had any sharp implements or what was wrong?
Told him to stay there. Told him to, it's in the statement, drop any weapons. that you've got. And no reply, just kept walking straight towards me.
So no reaction at all?
None.
But you did change direction at that point?
Yes. Aye.
Did you issue a warning that you may discharge your spray?
I don't think I did, no.
Was there a reason for that?
Because the situation changed that quickly, that he was now walking towards me, wasn't following commands, closing down the gap again. And as I say, that's it's a standard drill for OST. If somebody's walking towards you, posing a threat, it's get back, stay where you are, I'll spray. And you shout spray as it's being sprayed, as opposed to giving a verbal warning.
And that's what you're taught in OST?
That's a standard drill, yeah.
And you've said he was posing a threat. Do you want to say a little bit more about how threatened you felt?
Again, it's going back over the fact that we have numerous credible witnesses stating that he's in possession of a knife, a big knife. He's coming towards us, he's not engaging with us. We'll cover it a wee bit later on, but I think he's got a stare about him that's it felt like a dangerous situation. And he was closing the gap on me rapidly, so the spray was deployed.
Were you afraid about any threat to your life at that stage?
At that point, yes, for injury.
Afraid
Definitely.
of being injured?
Yes.
So you had a Pava spray,
Yes.
you've told us, and you've explained the difference. I wonder if you would look at something for me, please, which is a Pava spray. I think it's Perk 00816, actually. And this should be in a container. And do you recognise that as your Pava spray?
That is a Pava spray. There's a serial number on the bottom that would relate back to it being mine, but it's got my signature on it, so that would be the one that I handed over. So again, no reason to doubt that is.
So that was yours. I wonder if, again, you would mind demonstrating for the chair and the assessors the way that you held the spray when you were in Hayfield Road.
It'd be exactly the same.
Oh, exactly the same.
So that's a thing you get shown at OST. The hand in front to fend off the hand back to the for the spray.
Right. So can we look at paragraph 36, please? What do you mean the reconstructions? Sorry. So paragraph 36, you said you noted that PC Peyton was in a vulnerable position. I called out to the male, which caused him to turn and face me. That's what you've just said. He then looked directly at me with what I would describe as a vacant or 1,000-yard stare. So tell me, when you used the phrase vacant or 1,000-yard stare, what did you mean by that?
Like he wasn't focusing on me, he was looking through me, and it was a stare. It was a constant stare.
He wasn't blinking?
No, just an open-eyed stare. And like I said, it wasn't like he wasn't looking at the spray. It was in my hand or my hand. He didn't seem to be. It was just it was quite an imposing sort of intense stare.
Mm. And when you saw him look that way, how did you factor that into your assessment of the situation? Because as I understand it, that's the first time you've really seen his face.
Mm-hmm. Probably at that point it would be the fact that communication was going to be an issue. He wasn't communicating with us non-verbally as well as verbally, and that it was hard to judge, because to say that he wasn't in control of his actions, because he was able to walk along, he was able to no turn when I shouted on him. He was able to like walk towards me. So it was just really hard, I would say, to judge like what was going on with him. But at the same time, he was still coming towards me.
What did it make you think when you saw him looking that way? What did it make you think about his state of health?
Again, that's a hard thing to judge. It could be drink, could be drugs, could be a mental health. It's one of these things that, yes, it's a symptom of one thing, but it's also a symptom of many. So it's not just a case of this is what we're dealing with.
So you think it goes through your mind? It could be drugs, it could be alcohol. It could be mental health.
There's no point jumping to any sort of conclusion because it could be one, it could be many.
And you know that he's not been engaging with you verbally?
Yes.
And he's effectively ignoring you and he's looking through you now?
Yeah.
How did you factor that into your assessment of the situation?
I mean, it's basically if you can't communicate with somebody, then you're not going to ask them to stay where they are, stay back. You know, it's, I don't know what I'm trying to describe, but the communication part of it's not going to happen, so we're going to have to move on to the next part, which is be getting hands on the mail.
Did you consider stepping back and moving away from him, making a sort of tactical retreat, if you like?
Again, like PC Painting, as he was approaching me, I was taking a couple of steps back just to try and keep that gap from him. But as I'm getting back in the van and driving off wouldn't be an option. I wouldn't have thought.
But could you consider moving back, moving away from the man, giving him more space?
I tried to do that, but obviously us walking backwards and he's walking forwards, he's closing the gap quicker than I could make the gap.
Sorry, I thought you were walking back to retain that reaction gap.
Yes.
I'm talking about could you have walked away further back to give him more space, larger than the reaction gap?
No, but I've still got to step backwards for him to do that. I'm not going to turn my back on somebody that I think might be in potential possession of a knife. So I've still got to keep eyes on him, and I'm taking steps backwards as I would do so. And obviously I can only go back at a certain pace, and walking forward's always quicker than going backwards. So his focus is on me and he's coming towards me.
I thought his focus was on a 1,000-yard stare through you.
Well, coming through me, yeah.
Could you have stepped round towards the van, behind the van?
That was the direction I was going for, the headlight back round, and he was still coming towards me. I'm not consciously being aware of doing that, but I was keeping to the van as I was going round.
Could you have walked back round to the driver's side?
I mean, I was taking the steps back and he closed the gap as far as I was comfortable with allowing him to close the gap.
So you didn't feel comfortable going further away or turning your back on
I
him?
certainly wasn't going to be turning my back on him, and as I say, he's walking with purpose quicker than I could step backwards, and he's the one that's actively closing the gap on me, so I'm not taking any chances.
Right. Did you consider at that stage transmitting on airwaves and saying, this guy needs an ambulance?
No, not at that point.
Why not?
Because I didn't know what was the cause or what was going on. Like I say, we just turned up, he wasn't talking to us. We still thought he had a possession of a knife. That takes concentration to transmit on the radio and pass a message, where my focus is solely on him and keeping myself and the public safe.
And during this time, PC Payton's still crouched down?
At this point, I'd lost sight of PC Payton.
Right.
My focus was purely on Mr. Bio. And as long as Mr. Bio was coming towards me, he wasn't going towards PC Payton. So.
Can we look at paragraph 38, please? And you say, at this point, I formed the opinion that he was physically capable of causing serious injury to someone and was clearly in some sort of rage or zombie state. And I just wonder if we could look at those words, rage and zombie state. What does rage mean to you?
When I was saying something like that, it would be, where you could get yourself so worked up and so angry that you lose control of your surroundings, awareness of your surroundings, would be my take on that. Or sorry, what I was meaning, just somebody who's lost his senses, got that angry, got that irate, that he's lost his senses. And
then you also mentioned a zombie state.
That was coming back to the 1,000-yard stare and the fact that he was no speaking to us or talking to us.
So the zombie state reference was to the fact he wasn't communicating.
Yeah.
And he had this 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah.
And the rage, it wasn't that he was demonstrating signs of anger, but he had got himself so worked up or angry.
A possibility, yeah, that he'd looked his...
Yeah, okay. You didn't feed any of that information back to the control room.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a reason for that? Because this is the first time that you've seen him from the front.
Yes.
Was there a reason that you didn't factor that back to the control room or on the airwaves transmission?
Like I said, it was officer safety at that point. He was coming towards me, there was an immediate risk to myself, and you need a hand to transmit on the radio. Whereas if you're in that sort of stance, you didn't have a hand. It's not just okay. It's not the first thing that comes through your mind when somebody's within striking distance of you to pass that back on the radio. There's other priorities at that time.
Was there any way or any place that you could go to escape from Mr. Bayo walking towards you?
Again, that would involve turning my back on somebody who has possession of a knife, which is just something that you would never do.
Okay. And then can we look at paragraph 37? Sorry, just go back slightly. And you say you shouted at him, "Stay there." Do you see that paragraph?
Yep.
And then you again, so you shouted "stay there" or words to that effect. You had your Pava spray. You're in the defensive position and you say, "I again shouted, 'Drop your weapon,' or
Yep.
something like that," but there was no response. So that was the sort of second thing that you said to him there.
Yeah.
"Drop your weapon." Where could he have concealed a weapon?
In the belt of his jeans, in the waistband of his jeans.
Underneath the
Underneath clothing.
Underneath the t-shirt.
Yes. Or in his pocket. Bear in mind that we hadn't seen the knife at that time. We just had the description of a large knife. But he could have numerous pockets on his jeans, or as I said, in his waistband, or there's places that could be quite easily hidden on the person. That could have been a folding blade as well, for all we knew, so it could have been folded up into a pocket knife or anything, so we weren't taking any chances.
And then, after you'd shouted those commands, you sprayed him with your Pava spray?
I did, yes.
Right. And can I ask you, with other incidents, you talked about that this morning, with other incidents where you've been called out and someone's said to maybe have a knife, have you often used your spray if someone is not complying with your commands?
That would be the first scenario of that type. I mean, I've been into other calls like that. That was pretty soon after this. A gentleman believed to be in possession of a knife. We turned up, didn't have a knife visible. When we approached him with the spray drawn, gave them, go and stay where you are. Let me see, there's an allegation being made. Have you got a knife on you? And he went, well, no, it was actually one of the first sort of electronic cigarettes that came out. It had been misidentified. But no, it's not unusual to approach somebody with your spray. Like I said, maybe not in that stance, but certainly in your hand and down by the side or something like that.
So with the other one you're describing, you had your spray down at the side?
Yeah.
Beside your leg?
Yeah.
With Mr. Bayo, you were in a defensive position with your spray drawn?
Yeah, I got out of the van with it down by my side, but then when he turned and started walking towards me, the spray went up into the defensive position at that point.
So that was the point at which it's
Yeah.
in the defensive stance. And I think I asked you this morning about the use of spray. I don't need to go back over that. Can I ask you about some alternative tactics that we've heard about and we may hear more about? Can we look first of all at your statement? You've already answered some questions about this, paragraphs 42 and 43. And you were asked some questions about calming situations down, de-escalating or diffusing situations. And you've given us some information here. So you've already answered in relation to PC Peyton. Did you ask Mr. Bio any questions designed to calm the situation down, de-escalate or diffuse the situation?
And I mean, the first instruction was to stay there, and that if somebody's wanting to engage with you, they will stop and talk to you at that point. But if it's a one-sided communication with both non-verbal or lack of verbal also coming back for them, then it's hard to de-escalate through communication when it's one-sided communication.
And is that your expectation, even if the person is under the influence of drink or drugs or suffering from some sort of psychiatric episode?
You would expect some sort of acknowledgement in the fact that the police were there, yeah. In my experience, if people want to speak to you, then they will start communicating back with you.
Can I ask you if you know about something called the 5-step positive style? Have you heard of that? I won't ask you to remember it off the top of your head. Let me ask you to...
Is that the my actions lead to your actions?
Let me show you a slide regarding tactical communication, PS 17208. And we're looking for the one that says tactical communications. Yeah, we've looked at a number. Sorry, it's carry on. I've not got the number here, sorry, Miss Wildgoose. Keep going. Do you remember what number it is? I seem to have lost this. Could you give me 1 second and I'll just check the slide number? Number 7, I think it might be, sorry. Yes. 5-step positive style of tactical communications. And you'll see there's 5 listed: ethical appeal, reasonable appeal and explain, personal appeal and options, practical appeal and confirmation, and number 5 is action. Do you recognise that description, 5-step positive style? This is part of an officer safety training presentation. It's taken, key elements taken from the manual, OST manual. Well, let me...
I can't recall ever being... It's not anybody running through them or anything like that,
Right.
to be honest.
Let me give you some examples and it might refresh your memory. So, ethical appeal. This would, as I understand it, and there's evidence before the chair about this in a statement, that this would be a direct request such as, could you stand over there, please?
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody say that to Mr. Bio?
Must stay there.
Just stay there. And reasonable appeal and explain would be something like, this is why I'm asking, because you're causing a disturbance or you're breaking the law. So the approach, the communication approach would be, This is why I'm asking you to stand over there, because you're causing a disturbance or breaking the law. Did anyone say anything like that to him?
Again, I think that would be in relation to a different type of incident. This is going straight into the other drill that I was saying, where somebody's closing down on you for the reactive arc. It's get back, stay back, or you'll get sprayed. This is doesn't apply in this instance.
You didn't think it applied here?
No, this is for somebody who's, like I say, happy to communicate, who might be in possession of a knife, who are wanting to self-harm or something like that. You see, talk to them, come on, what's wrong with me, what's going on today? And it's somebody who's wanting to talk to the police, who's calm, who isn't a threat to anybody straight away. It's a completely different scenario for in relation to Mr. Bayou, who was an immediate threat. And I say that relies on OST training, which is get back, stay where you are, clear verbal commands. If they fail to follow the verbal commands and close you down, then the spray gets deployed.
Okay. And let me just finish this for completeness then. Personal appealing options would be something along the lines of, if you continue to ignore my requests, you may end up being arrested, and if so, you could lose your job. There was nothing like that said here.
No, there's no time for anything like that to be passed.
And then number 4 would be something like, is there anything I can do as a police officer or say that would make you cooperate? There was nothing like that said here.
No.
No. So there was no attempt to ask Mr. Bayou, for example, what's wrong? Or are you not feeling well? Are you okay? No attempt to do that. No attempt to ask him if he had a knife, or to ask him, tell me what's been happening
Well,
to
I
you.
asked them to drop any weapons that I had.
Right. And we've heard some evidence about officers giving people some space, some time, some distance to allow them to start communicating with officers. Did you consider that that was appropriate in this situation?
No, because we've still got a male who's in possession of a knife, or potentially in possession of a knife, who we believe to be in possession of a knife, on an open road with potential for vehicles or members of the public to exit their houses and that. So time's got to be balanced with risk.
At any time, did you consider walking alongside Mr. Bayou instead of blocking his path in any way?
No, in relation to the OST training, I wasn't going to get that close to him. He was walking straight for me. I had to kind of get alongside him without getting close enough that I'd be within his fighting arc, which...
And that's not something that PC Payton did when he first got out the van?
He's got out onto the pavement, which is where Mr. Bayou was, and they tried to engage with him, and that's not happened. And as I say, Mr. Bayou's been closing down the reaction gap at that point.
Okay. After PC Payton sprayed him, and after you sprayed him, did you consider that the use of a spray could make a person have increased aggression?
No, the idea is spraying the spray is to incapacitate the person, which, as far as I'm aware, is... the only thing you get told to spray is you don't spray somebody who has a gun, in case they start firing off in random directions when they can't see. But on that point there, you would always spray somebody.
Did you consider, when you were reviewing the situation as it evolved, did you consider that the act of spraying someone could cause them to become more aggressive?
It's... No, really, no. It's not something that I think we've even covered in training. If you're at a point where you need to spray someone, the fact that it might make them a wee bit more angry, is kind of by the by. It's the spray needs to be deployed. There's an imminent risk to myself. The spray is being deployed at that point.
Okay. We know Mr. Bayou was black. At any stage at that point, did you have any concerns or perceive any risk of communication difficulties with him?
No, because even if there's a language barrier, you would have the non-verbal communications. The fact that I'm standing there with my hand up in the stop position, the fact that a police van's turned up with blue lights and etc. If it was just a clear case of a language barrier, he'd have turned, he'd talk to us, and you could overcome a communications barrier through language quite easy, or with certain tools.
So even if someone doesn't actually speak English, there's those non-verbal means of communication and your body language, effectively.
Yeah.
And is that normally an effective way of communicating that you want someone to stop?
You could certainly get a reaction from somebody if you jump out. If the police van turned up with blue lights and sirens, or blue lights in this instance, you would expect somebody to turn around and go, "Whoa, what's going on?" Even if they didn't speak English, there would be a reaction from them.
So even if English isn't their first language, or they don't speak English at all, if they're of sound mind, they would usually have a reaction.
You would expect, yeah.
And would that be the case even if they couldn't hear you? If the person was deaf, for example?
Yeah, which is why you would get out with everybody knows that
it's the visual,
that's a stop sign, yeah.
The visual behaviour. Did you perceive at that time a risk of any cultural differences because Mr. Bai was black, or any sort of misinterpretation by him of your approach to him?
I'm not aware of any. That would...
Okay. If he'd been white, would you have attempted first to engage him in conversation?
No. It's like I gave that other example where it happened recently after it. It was somebody's in possession of a knife, so we go towards them and give the clear verbal instructions to say where you are. And depending on what sort of reaction you get back is the next step.
Am I right in thinking that incident that you described, the person did communicate with you? Yeah.
But I still approached them in the same way, with the spray drawn, and still with the verbal commission was stay where you are, show me your hands. Then once I feel safe, then we'll start communicating.
Thank you. Could we look at paragraph 45 of your statement, please? This is where you talk about Tomlinson and Short arriving. Do you see that? At some point, PC Tomlinson and PC Short arrived. I was not aware of their arrival at the locus and cannot comment on when they arrived, nor where I was positioned when they arrived.
Yeah.
So you couldn't see them at that point?
It's not so much I never seen them, I wasn't aware of them arriving. But yeah.
Okay. Let's have a look at the footage, please, the enhanced video timeline. And we'll play from further on, please. 7:20:23 or thereabouts. And we'll play this. And while you're looking at this, first of all, I think we'll look at the CCTV footage. And then we'll play it again and we'll focus on the reconstruction tile, if that's okay. So we'll play it twice. So it's a short period, 7:20:23 to 7:20:39.
You need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. It's described as male.
And so do you see now, you've watched the CCTV, so I think the second time we'll play it, we'll look at the reconstruction tile. Thank you. So for the same times, please.
You need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. She said it's described as...
Thank you. Were you able to watch the reconstruction?
Yes.
And do we see another white van arriving at this point?
Yes.
And stopping. So that's 7:20. And the time on the real-time clock at the moment is 7:20 and 40 seconds. And would it be possible to rewind slightly to 32 seconds, please? Or as near to that timing as we can. That's perfect, thank you. So at this stage, do you see on the reconstruction tile that there is another vehicle approaching the roundabout, or actually entering the roundabout?
Yes.
And we can see on the CCTV below it the vehicle itself.
Yes.
And then if we can just move on slightly, there's 2 blue dots near the van. We spoke about those before. And then just stop that there. So that's the second van coming through the roundabout.
Yes.
And at this point we see a blue dot behind at the rear of the large police van.
Yes.
Who do you think that was?
My guess would be that's PC Payton, having been sprayed, or having the after effects of his spray, making his way around to the other side of the van.
Well, we may hear from him at some point.
Yeah.
So, and then carry on, please, Miss Wildgoose.
Bravo, Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. She said...
Lovely. Thank you. And so we see that this second police van has now arrived on Hayfield Road and is parked on Hayfield Road.
Yep.
And it's reached a stage to the rear of your van, to the rear of where the people have been. Do you know who was in this van?
I do now, yes.
You do now, but you couldn't see them at the time.
No, I had no idea who turned up.
Were you towards the front of your van at the time they arrived?
At that point was the point where I was suffering the effects of the Pava spray that had been flicked back at me. So I was blinking and trying to get my orientation. I can't remember much of what happened at that point other than I ducked away. And then when the next thing I was aware of was that both me and PC Payton were on the driver's side of your van. And then at that point, I'm kind of jumping on ahead a wee bit, but that's when the next thing I was aware of was Constable Short being chased.
Can I ask you about this moment when you ducked away?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you duck away to?
The down the side of the van, on the driver's side.
Would it help if we went back to the stiles, and you could maybe the stills, sorry, and we could maybe see where you ducked away to? Right. So this is number 6, I think. Yes. So you've described earlier how you were walking backwards in a defensive stance with your spray, your
Yes.
Pava spray up, and you couldn't turn your back on Mr. Bio at that point. So you've told us that you ducked away. Where did you duck away to?
I think that was a reaction to the spray taking effect, and let's say I don't know exactly, but I know the positions that we ended up. I think I was there, and PC Payton had managed to come round the back of the van, crossed over me at some point, and he was there.
So he was closer to the front of the van.
Yeah, we'd managed to cross over at some point, but I don't know how. I'd say that'd be just an effect of the Pava spray in my eyes.
I'd like to try and get an explanation from you about how you moved from the near side of the van, walking backwards, holding the spray, to being on the other side of the van.
Yeah, that's like I thought I explained that as I was at the front headlight cluster,
Mm-hmm.
which
Do you
would
want
be
to point to that?
Yeah, number 3. And then as Mr. as I've got his attention, he's been walking back towards me.
Do you want to use the line? That might be useful to see that. Maybe even to use a red circle first, actually, to point out where Mr. Bio was, and then you can draw the line. So if you point to where Mr. Bio was.
So he started walking. Oh.
So he's there. The spray with Peyton is over.
Yeah,
and
I was
you've
trying to draw the line for the
attracted
direction.
his direction, and then I think we're going to give you a line,
Right.
and you can.
I'll stop touching it.
And just use the screen and show us. So he's walking towards you,
Yeah.
where you're standing, and you're walking back, and you've told us that there wasn't really an escape route. You couldn't turn your back on him. So how was it that you moved from position 3 to position 1?
Because I was trying to create the space. So I was coming back round the front of the van to try and to create the space, and he's followed me around the front of the van.
Right.
And at which point I've sprayed my pava into his eyes and made quite good contact with it, and it's had no reaction. He's wiped his face with the pava spray, and just, I wouldn't say flicked it in my direction, but wiped his face and flicked into the air, and I felt mild effects of the pava in my eyes at that point, and just instinctively, more than anything, I've just turned and tried to, just a reaction to turn and get away. And as I said, the next thing I realised as my vision was coming back to me was that I was in position 1, PC Peyton was at position 2. And
So let's go through that. Did you just say a moment ago you were at the front of the van when you discharged your pava spray?
yes,
And was that near to the circle with 3 in it, or closer to the front of the vehicle?
I was probably closer. I'd been followed round the front of the vehicle and I was back towards, if not past, the other front headlight. If that makes sense.
So when you discharged your spray, do you want to use a red circle to identify where you were?
I don't know exactly, but it would be somewhere in the region of then, around the front of the van, as though we were coming round the front of the van.
So right round the front near the driver's side?
Yeah.
And where was Mr. Bio when you discharged the spray?
He'd probably somewhere about here.
Okay.
That's a bit.
Are you happy with that position?
Aye, it's hard to
Or-
say exactly, but aye.
You can move them around if you touch them again, but that's an indication of where
Roughly,
he
yeah.
was. And then describe again his reaction to your use of the spray.
Like I said earlier, with pava spray, you've got to get a direct contact with the eyes because it doesn't go into a cloud. So sprayed, got good contact with his eyes, and his face and his eyes. It appeared to have no reaction at all. And then he just wiped the spray that was on his face and just sort of flicked it away off his hand.
What was the distance between you and Mr. Bio when you discharged your spray?
It would be somewhere in the region of 12 to 15 feet.
And is that sort of within the range of a pava spray?
Yeah.
And when you saw did he still have that 1,000-yard stare on?
Yeah,
in
that
his-
never changed.
Yeah. And when you saw him wipe the pava spray off his face and flick it away, how did you factor that into this review, this risk assessment issue that you're doing?
It concerned me that it had no effect on him, because like I say, that was one of my go-to tools. So it concerned me that it had no effect on him. But I say that was immediately replaced with the fact that I was then incapacitated by the pava, which was one of the points that pava is not meant to have cross-contamination. And that had an effect on me at that point. So I went from probably pre-planning into. I would probably say my reaction at that point was a survival, just get away from try and get myself to a place of safety, as opposed to a risk assessment or anything like that.
Explain to the chair how the PAVA spray affected you, what impact that had.
It immediately makes you close your eyes, and as part of that, I don't know the biology behind it, but you do sort of immediately supposed to try and get away from the pain as you duck away and turn away, and your hands come up to your face. And I think that's just an automatic reaction. That's something you don't have control over.
So, having been someone who had very few physical limitations, you then become quite incapacitated.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Aye. To a certain extent. I mean, it wasn't a full dose of the PAVA spray that I had, but yeah, it severely affected for the seconds that I was incapacitated from it. I couldn't see. Couldn't you?
I was going to ask you, how long did you have your eyes closed?
I only got, let's say, it was a few droplets, but a couple of seconds. Enough for us to end it, or to not know how I got back towards the back end of the van. Kind of opened my eyes, and that was the situation I was presented with at that point.
So you closed your eyes because of the PAVA spray.
Yep.
After you've been in, I see, circle 6 there.
Roughly, yes.
And then by the time you open them, you're in position 1 at the rear wheel.
Yeah, near enough.
And you've had your eyes closed for that sort of the length of the vehicle, really.
Yeah, pretty. I mean,
is that a reasonable indication?
It's reasonable, yeah. I mean, I did kind of exactly where I was in relation to the van. I had my back to the van, but I was aware of the fact that the van was behind me when I opened my eyes again, and PC Peyton was off to my left.
So the van was at your back, and you were facing out from the van?
Out from the van, yeah.
Out from the van. Towards the other side of Hayfield Road?
Yes.
Right. And PC Peyton at that time, as you stood there, would have been on your left?
Yes.
And we've not heard from him, but he's come from the corner in Hayfield Road round to behind the van as well.
Yeah. Where
at that point was Sheku?
At that point, the next thing I was aware of is appearing in my line of vision coming from behind our van, chasing after PC shot.
So can you point out with another circle where he was when you first saw him? When you were in position 1? Or give us an indication, if you can.
He's coming from behind the van into my line of vision. I don't know exactly how far away he was from the van, but it would be somewhere in the region of number 8.
So he's been in position 7. He's been sprayed by you.
Yep.
And somehow he's got to position 8.
Yes.
But your eyes have been closed up until then.
Yeah,
so you won't
blinking furiously, yeah.
Or blinking furiously. What direction is he facing when you see him at position 8?
He's actively running diagonally from 8 across the road.
Could you draw us a line?
So that was the sort of direction of travel.
Right. All right. Well, I want to come back to this, but I'd like to go back to the footage, if you don't mind. Is that possible to do that now? Thank you.
Inspector Stewart to the control room to the set attending.
So we're going to play it from 7/20/16. It's a very short period, so although you can see your van again, we might as well just carry on, and then I'll ask Miss Wildgoose to play that now.
Monitoring this obviously from an ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the male, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feedback to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. It's described as male, black, well-built, 6 foot tall, wearing a white T-shirt, dark coloured jeans and carrying a very large knife.
Could you stop it there, please? Right, and could we go back slightly? Right, let's just play it from there, and I'll tell you when to pause, please.
I'm monitoring this obviously from an ARV perspective. If you get sightings of the male, you need to make an initial assessment yourself and feed back to me straight away, and I'll listen out on the channel.
Control for Bravo, do we have a description? I missed it. It's described as male, black, well-built, 6 foot tall, wearing a white T-shirt, dark
Can we
coloured
pause
jeans.
it there? So at the moment there's no blue dots there, but a second or two back from that there were a couple of blue dots. Right. Can you give any indication of, so there's 2 blue dots there at the rear of your big van, between your van and the smaller van that's arrived on the scene. At that stage, do you know where you were? You've said that you were at the driver's side of your big van.
Yeah.
With PC Peyton.
Yes.
And the blue dots, do you know who they would indicate?
No.
No, not at all. Right, carry on, please.
Tall, wearing a white T-shirt, dark coloured
Stop,
jeans and
please.
carrying a...
And then we see another blue dot there. Do you think you and PC Peyton were on the other side of the van at this stage? Or are you not sure?
No, I was always at the van until...
Always at the van
yeah,
until later?
until I witnessed the chase.
Right. And then can we just show the next part, please, very
A
briefly?
very large knife.
Right, stop. And we see that blue dot, and that appears to be somebody travelling between the vans, between the rear of the big police van, your van, towards the front of the smaller police van.
Yep.
Do you have any idea who that might have been?
That could be either or both Mr. Bayo and PC Short. From that position, that would be my guess.
All right. Well, we'll hear other evidence about that. Right, I'd like to move on to, you've mentioned Nicole Short.
Yes.
PC Short.
Yes.
We may hear that, in fact, she was in that smaller of the 2 vans, that she arrived at the scene with PC Tomlinson. I think you probably...
I believe that to be the case now,
You believe
yes.
that to be the case now. And I will be coming on to this in a bit of detail, but can I look finally at paragraph 46 of your statement? And do you see, the first I saw PC Short was her running away from Shekubayo, and he was chasing after her. It was clear to see that PC Short was in a state of panic as she ran away from PC Shekubayo. He was about 4 feet behind her. I turned away briefly to communicate with PC Peyton, and as I looked back to PC Short again, I saw she was falling to the ground, with the male right behind her. Both of her feet were off the ground, and he had his hands raised. I formed the opinion that she had been pushed to the upper part of her body. So this part of your statement, this is your perspective when you're behind the van, at the driver's side of your van, is that right?
Yes.
And this is the moment when you see Shekubayo again,
Yes.
after you've cleared your eyes from the spray, and you see she's running away from Mr. Bayo, and he's chasing her at that point.
Yes.
So that's going on Hayfield Road, behind the area behind your van.
Yeah,
To the
between the 2 vans as far as I'm aware.
Between
yeah.
the 2 vans.
Yeah.
He's about 4 feet behind her. And you say, I turned away briefly to communicate with PC Peyton. Can you tell the chair how long would you estimate that you turned away for?
Long enough to say, Alan, give me your baton.
Right. And so you say that to him. Where's PC Peyton at this point?
He's to my left hand side at the front of the van. Aye, so I've looked that way. Being aware of the chase, the movement, I've looked, seen the chase, looked at Alan and say, give me your baton, and looked back to see what was going on.
So a brief turning away.
Yes, aye.
And PC Peyton's on your left at that point.
Yes.
Is he still incapacitated by the spray?
Yes.
Is he still crouched down?
Yes.
Are his hands still at his face?
Yes. Aye, he's still fully under the influence of the incapacitant spray.
Because he had CS spray, you had PAVA.
Yes.
When you turned to him and asked for his baton, what did he do?
At that, I'm not sure, because I turned back to see what was happening, but I just assumed that he would be getting his baton for me.
And when you turned back, do you want to look at paragraph 47 of your statement?
Yep.
You'll see, I turned back to PC Peyton briefly as she was in mid-fall and obtained PC Peyton's baton from him.
That's a typo. That should be a turn back in the direction of PC Short.
PC Short.
Yeah.
I thought that might be the case. So you turn back, looking to your right, to PC Short.
Yep.
And she was in mid-fall.
Yes.
Can you describe what that mid-fall looked like?
Both feet were off the ground. It's hard to explain it, but yeah, somebody who's, the top part of her body was further forward than her feet, and there's no way that she could keep her balance. And she'd been running at the time, so both her feet were off the ground, and she was clearly going to fall at that point.
What direction was she going to fall in?
Forward. She was running forward.
No, sorry, I wasn't clear. Towards Henry Road or towards the other side of Hayfield Road?
Towards the other side of Hayfield Road. They started to run diagonally, so she was just continuing the path that
So
she'd been
she's
running.
also running diagonally at that point?
Yes, well, I think, yeah. They were going from one side of the road to the other. Maybe it wasn't at 45 degrees, but they were crossing diagonally, yeah.
Right. Thank you. I think just to finish off this passage, when you turned back to PC Peyton, did he give you his baton?
No, he didn't have it at that point.
He didn't have it, or he wasn't giving it to you?
He didn't have it. He hadn't produced it at that point.
He hadn't produced it?
Yeah.
So what did you then do?
At that point, I turned back to him. I was already facing him and says to him, Alan, give me your fucking baton.
And what did he do when you said that?
I think he started to get his baton at that point. You see him starting to go into his belt to remove his baton from his carrier.
To hand to you?
Yes, I believe so.
How long did that take?
A couple of seconds for him to draw the baton. He drew the baton, he extended it, and then he passed it or held it up for me to take from him. So it would be literally that long. So
Okay.
2 or 3 seconds.
I'm conscious of the time.
Yes, would that be a convenient point to stop?
Yes, it would actually. We can return to this in the morning.
Very well. We'll adjourn now until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.